Good evening, members, and welcome to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee that's been rearranged from the 15th of September to this evening. And also welcome to anybody watching us on live, and also welcome to two of our members who are actually one on holiday and the other at the party conference. So welcome to you all. We have a long agenda this evening, members, so can we please ensure that we stick to the relevant points within the agenda item and not sort of stray too far. And equally, those presenting, can we make sure that perhaps we stick to a maximum 10 minutes on presenting your papers in front of us this evening? The fact that we've had an extra couple of weeks means that all the members sitting around this table will be absolutely fully versed with the papers that we have in front of them. So we should be able to go straight into questions and hopefully help Cabinet and help the Council to be able to formulate policies going forward and give our views and recommendations as appropriate. So we will start with apologies for absence.
Yes, Chair, we've received apologies from councillors Norman, Yates and A. Little.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Anyone? Okay, so we move on to item 3, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. Shall I go through them page by page for those present? That's probably the easiest. So we've got page 4, page 5, and page 6, and the minutes as a whole. Yeah. All happy to take? All in favour?
Right.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Good. So we'll move on to item number 4, which is the work programme. Everyone got that in front of them? Copy of the work. Okay. Came out as a supplementary document to you.
No, don't remember it.
You don't?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay.
Yeah,
It
Yeah,
did.
it came as a supplementary.
I'm happy to talk through. Then the next scheduled meeting is the 17th of November. And at that meeting, we have at the moment medium-term financial strategy, and at this moment in time, we will also have the dual stream recycling implementation that originally was on tonight's agenda, but the Cabinet members unfortunately can't make it. So we're going to move that to the meeting in November. So those are the 2 items at the moment for the meeting in November, as well as the usual updates that may well come from the task groups. So those are the only items we have on at the moment. It will probably also give us an opportunity, perhaps at that meeting, to preliminary look at sort of budget proposals. I don't know whether we're likely to have anything that we could look at by then or not, or whether we could ourselves take some time just to have a look at that within the committee. Yeah, we do have a special meeting for the budget later on before the end of the year, but if we haven't got too much on the agenda, or we can just stick to the items we have on the agenda and not have such a lengthy meeting as we will potentially have this evening. So should we leave it to what's on the agenda for now?
Yeah.
For the 17th, and then if anything else develops, we can always add to that, and we can sort of advise people at our pre-teams meeting of anything else that's added to that agenda when we do that. Okay, folks, thank you. So now we'll move on to item. We're going to bring forward Tom Marshall with the planning committee protocols. Have you all seen? I take it you've all seen the planning protocol papers. So, Councillor Marshall,
Yes.
we're in your hands for the next 5 to 10 minutes, Councillor Marshall.
Hello.
Hello. Can we have the votes from the jury, please? Can you hear us, Tom?
This is Helsinki calling. Here are the votes from the Finnish judges.
The floor is yours,
Are you ready to
Councillor
move?
Marshall. Carry on.
Mike, are you ready for me?
Yes, Tom.
Okay. Right. Do you want to ask me a question and then I'll give you an answer? If that's going to work.
I thought you would like to go through the planning protocol or parts of the planning protocol that have changed, updating members before we got into a general discussion.
No, that's fine, Mike. That's absolutely fine. So I've just been chatting to Debs because we haven't had any audio feedback from you at all. So that was the first we've heard from you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for bearing with me on this slightly dodgy link from Birmingham, all the way from Birmingham. The protocol, of course, has changed, and the main one is under the member call-in section, of course. And you'll all have that in front of you in your report for this evening's meeting, under 16.4. What happened was where effectively ward members always used to have 10 minutes to speak. Because of a meeting, I think it was in May, where we had admittedly a very long officer report. We had a very long officer report, and then of course we had several speakers. And the ward members were speaking for up to 10 minutes. Now, because we had 2 or 3 of them, we had a meeting which went on beyond 9 o'clock. Shortly afterwards, a few days later, the matter was being addressed. I did communicate with Christy Timms, who I think is in the meeting this evening. And I think it was agreed that we needed to try and do something to sharpen up the agenda so that this didn't happen again. And one of the things that we looked at was whether it was possible to curtail the amount of time spent by all the speakers, not just ward members. And we did initially decide to go from 5 minutes down to 3 minutes for everybody, apart from ward members who would have 5 minutes. That met with an awful lot of opposition and considerable opprobrium from many, including, I think it's right in saying, one of those who was quite outspoken about that. And in fact, Richard, who's sitting with me in front of me, he was another one who was very outspoken and felt that it denied local ward councillors an opportunity to represent their constituents. So we reassessed it, and then we had if you like, an informal debate after a planning committee meeting where we thrashed it out, and we came to what I thought was a fairly satisfactory consensus. And that consensus was that everybody got, for every single person, irrespective of whether they were the applicant's agent, an objector, a supporter, or the ward councillor, they all had 5 minutes. When we had that meeting, it became apparent that there were still people feeling as though that 5 minutes was still unreasonable from a ward councillor's perspective, because it was still denying the local constituents a voice, a democratic voice. So the net result was that we concluded that we would have 5 minutes for everybody across the board, and then a special dispensation for ward councillors who requested 10 minutes, and that 10 minutes would be granted at the discretion of the chair. That is effectively where we are today. That is, I believe, as it's more or less written in your current protocol. So just to sort of reaffirm that, it's 5 minutes across the board with a 10-minute option for a ward councillor, should it be requested, by the previous Thursday to the meeting on the Monday. And if I feel that that is a reasonable request, then I, as chairman, and I can't speak for subsequent chairs, not chairman, I cannot speak for subsequent chairs, of course, but my own feeling is that I would like to take a very laissez-faire and reasonable approach to that, were I to receive a request for an extension to the 5 minutes, up to a maximum of 10. That, I think, is about as concise as I can explain it, and I'm more than happy to answer questions should anyone have one. Thank you. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Tom. We'll just come back into the room now, Tom, and we'll just go around and see if anyone got any questions for you. Members who'd like to.
Okay.
Councillor Grange.
Thank you, Chair. I fundamentally disagree, I have to say. I think we need to, before we make any changes, which Councillor Marshall has, by his own words, said were done on an informal consensus, I think we should go back and look at what the planning process is for, who the various parties are, and what we want out of it. So I read the protocol. I think we can all agree that decisions should be unbiased, impartial, well-founded, development should be controlled in the public interest, and members are responsible to the electorate. I'm reading that straight from the protocol. I think that's all agreed. The protocol is then a document and a set of operating procedures that converts those points into how we actually operate. I think for me, there's kind of 4 key points. I think there's the way the change was made, which is an overview and scrutiny committee we should be interested in, because informal consensus of one committee is not a good way to make a decision. Reducing non-committee members speaking to just 5 minutes. I suspect most people around this room have spoken as a non-committee member. Getting your points across in 5 minutes when these are technical planning issues is very difficult. This is the only opportunity that we have on behalf of our residents to feed into that process. So 10 minutes is barely sufficient. I think I could probably make an argument that says that should be 15 minutes. We've also got to bear in mind that that is our first opportunity to put our points across. The officers and everyone else have presented their reports. We don't get that opportunity. Limiting the time of people to speak on behalf of people whose lives could be fundamentally affected by planning just strikes me as wrong. The convenience of the committee should not be a good reason to reduce that opportunity to speak on behalf of people. Expecting the chair to make decisions on who can and who can't get 10 minutes strikes me as an absolute no. We shouldn't be putting any chair in the position where they have to do that. For example, if I went to the chair and said, I want 10 minutes, and for any reason that was turned down, I would probably make a bit of noise about it. I would probably say things like, this is unfair, this is unequitable. We shouldn't be putting the chair in the position where that happens. I think there's another point we should also throw into the mix when we're talking about this protocol, and that's aligning our call-in procedure and when we can apply our call-in to the neighbour consultation period. Because at the moment, those 2 periods are not aligned. We've got a set period of time, but during that time, plans can change in discussion with officers. I had a situation recently where plans changed, the neighbour response period was extended, but then the councillor call-in process time wasn't extended. So we are not aligning our councillors' ability to comment on these things with our residents' ability to comment on these things. It strikes me that I accept that planning meetings are long, I get that. But that should not be the factor that drives how we change our protocols and how we represent our residents in a just, fair and equitable way. So my proposal would be we keep the 10-minute speaking period, but in addition, we also align that call-in process with the neighbour consultation period, because I think that would then give us decisions that are unbiased, impartial, well-founded. We can say we are representing our residents, and it doesn't put the chair in a position where they could be accused of bias if, for whatever reason, and I'm not accusing Tom, I know Tom wouldn't, but a fictional future chair may well not be as even-handed as Tom, but we would be stuck with that protocol. I reserve the right to come back in a bit. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else want to join in this stage?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to kind of confirm, Councillor Norman can't be here tonight. He's isolating, but he's also sent in a similar query around the councillor call-in and the 25-day period. I'm not going to rehash it there, but that's a second member who's taking the same position on that particular point.
Thanks, sir. Anybody else? Views on this, on the change that have been proposed before I come in? Anybody else got any views? That's good.
Oh, no, over the last one.
Thank you, Chair. It's just to.
Like, I'm happy to come back when you require me to.
So it's just a clarify a point that's been made. The actual comments can be received right up until the actual day of the committee from residents. So just in terms of the alignment issue, it's just to make sure that the committee understands that that runs right up until the morning.
Thank you for that clarification. Anybody else? Okay, Tom, I'm just going to comment as well, and then we'll come back to you for your views, Tom. I have to say, I'm completely aligned with Councillor Grange. I think 10 minutes for many applications is probably not is probably not quite enough. And I know from my experience on the developments that I've had to speak about in Fradley, the large scale developments, I've really struggled to get it in within the 10 minutes time. And one of the observations that I witnessed is that officers seem to go through the applications in great detail, bearing in mind planning members will have had these applications a good couple of weeks before the planning meeting. So my understanding is most of the people in that meeting will have looked at the plans and will have a clear understanding of them. My suggestion would be that the officers just need to bullet point any issues that have come from that application that perhaps they need to bring to the attention of members, and therefore that in its way would reduce the amount of time that is spoken at planning meetings. I do agree. I think to reduce the time that we're allowed to speak on our residents' behalf is wrong. I think the system we had before worked perfectly well as far as I was concerned. The other issue I have in relation to the discretion from the chairman is that's open to challenge. What's to say that an application is only given 5 minutes to speak, and then that person challenged it and said, why wasn't the elected member allowed to speak for 10 minutes? I've heard in the past that has happened. So I think there's so many ambiguities about it that I think it really needs looking at. I also believe it should have come to ONS earlier so that we could have actually given some views before the protocol was rewritten. So, John, did you want to come back before we make it, before we or should we, let's bring Tom back in and see if Tom's any comment. Tom, do you want to come back in?
Yes, more than happy to. Thank you very much, Ryan. And thank you for the comments which have been made from members as well. The point was made about it being informal consensus, and I think those were probably almost my words, so I'm certainly not taking issue with that. The point is the planning committee comprises, or at least it did comprise at the time, 15 members. We are now one down because we've lost Councillor Tapper, so we're down to 14. But at the time, there were 15 on the planning committee. So it could be argued that the consensus that was reached at planning committee, and I'm certainly not trying to argue the point, I'm just stating a fact, the decision that was made informally, if you like, post a planning committee meeting, was that we felt that the protocol as it exists at the moment and is written in the form that you see in your report was acceptable to the 15 members of the planning committee. Now, I'm not quite sure how many sit on ONS, but I don't think it's any more than 15. So I wish to be a little bit sort of not difficult, and I'm just saying that the consensus was reached by a committee of 15 members. That's the first thing. Now, in terms of the way in which we administer the 5 minutes or the extended 5 minutes to 10 minutes, I am going to suggest that I was provided with a table by, I think it's Christy Timms, I think it was. She sent me a list of 7 different local authorities, all neighbouring Staffordshire, all in the Midlands. And none of them, apart from Stafford Borough Council, I think, gives 10 minutes to any of the members to speak. But that's only if there is a large application, it's a major application. So apart from Stafford, which grants 10 minutes to large applications, and East Staffs, which is unlimited at the discretion of the chair. So then we have, again, that discretion of the chair condition. All the others, that's 5 others, there is no way that anybody could speak at one of those planning committee meetings for more than 5 minutes, actually. So I'm just trying to put some context into this debate. Now, can I just make it clear that I don't mind what conclusion we arrive at. I don't have an axe to grind here at all. I was terribly interested in reducing it from 10 to 5, but we felt we did that as a pragmatic response to a situation which arose. So that's really where we stand on that one. And if anybody has any further questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. But as I say, just reiterate, the 7 local authorities that I have in front of me, tell you that East Staffs, Hinkley and Bosworth Borough Council, South Derbyshire, South Staffs, Staffs Borough, and Tamworth Borough Council. None of those are as lenient in terms of the time as Lichfield District Council would appear to be. Thank you.
Tom, could I ask you a question then? How many meetings can you remember have gone over time that you thought that it was too late to continue with the meeting, or you would need to in future look at the planning
You
protocol.
mean standing orders? You mean
Yes,
how many times have we had to use standing orders, Mike?
yes.
What, in the last, say, 2 or 3 years? I would say 3. Maybe 3.
In that
Maybe
bit-
1 a year.
So based on that suggestion, then the thought has come down to reducing the amount of time that we would speak in order that doesn't happen.
It's quite rare that we would have a situation where we were compromised for time. But on the occasions when it has happened, it has been significant that sometimes we've had till 1:30, which on the occasions when it happens, I think I and others feel is actually appropriate.
Okay, thanks, John. Joan.
Thank you, Chair. What do we have at the planning committee meeting? Maximum 4 applications. You're saving 20 minutes maximum from a meeting. And whilst other councils may do something different, I'm kind of not that interested in it. What we're looking at here is changing our own protocols for a matter that is really important to our residents. I just think this is a huge step backwards. As a council, we are going out there and saying we want to engage more, we want people to get involved. This is one place where people can get involved. We can get involved on behalf of our residents. A further point, if I may, on the calling process. I mean, if we don't align it with the neighbour consultation period, bearing in mind there has to be a sensible view that when the papers go out, that absolutely is the end of it. The consequence of that is driving inefficiency into the process. Because if I know, as a ward councillor, I've got a limited 25 days to call it in, but the plans may change, I'm going to preempt that and I'm going to call everything in. Because why wouldn't I? Because if my residents come down to me further down the line and say, can you represent us on this behalf? I'm not going to turn around and say, well, sorry, I've missed the timescale because I didn't call it in within the 25 days. I'm going to drive inefficiency into that process by making sure that I'm never in that situation. We have got, as a council, to recognise who our customers are. We have got to stop thinking about what's convenient for us and how we represent our residents properly. That for me is the overriding factor in this. Saving a maximum of 20 minutes from a meeting and cutting down our ability to represent our residents is just crazy. I can't even see why there's sense in that idea.
Thank you. Anybody else before?
On a number of occasions, I've had residents speaking with justified cases or justified cause to speak, and they've struggled. They're intimidated, they're nervous, they're not accomplished public speakers, and they struggle to get their message home because the time limit cut them off. If we cut them down to 5 minutes, I think they will be nonplussed.
Mr. Timms.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, another point of clarification, just to underline that on an average agenda of 4 items, it would actually be 20 minutes per item that would be saved by the 5-minute reduction. So that adds up to considerably more because it's 5 minutes per speaker.
Ward councillor, that's the only one we're talking about, non-committee ward councillors.
Okay, apologies. Not appreciating the difference in that. But I think the other matter that we need to make sure is clear is that throughout the process, the consultation process, that those inputs are designed to be fed in before, so that they can be considered in the cool light of day and the cool light of sound advice and legal support as well, and actually saving all that up to here within the committee, within a live debate, is actually quite difficult to manage and to correlate that at the final end. So it's about encouraging people to perhaps do that earlier on in the process rather than saving it all up for the speaker time that's available. And there was another point. I don't know what the other point was.
5 minutes per speaker.
Yeah, 5 minutes per speaker. What we've established that we're only debating the 5
Yeah, we're
minutes
talking about
The non-committee.
the members. So we're not talking about. No, I think that was it. If there's another one, I'll ask it one more time. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Grant.
Thank you. I'd just like to come back on that point about collating all the information. At the committee meeting, if you are a non-committee member, that is your absolute last chance to get your residents' points across. We all know that in planning, there's the presumption in favour of sustainable development. We know that applicants have a right of appeal. Objectors don't. That is their absolute last chance to get their points across. Seeing someone and someone saying stuff to you is a damn sight more powerful than it being written down. I think it's just a complete step backwards. I can't express how angry I am about this proposal.
Does anybody else want to come in before we sort of wrap up? Councillor Robson.
So listening through that, it's been really interesting that we don't have an evidence base to make a decision on here. We're not making an evidence-based decision. We're making a kind of qualitative decision on the feeling of some people that they might have, depending on what's on there. And I think if we're going to be starting to look at reducing the opportunities for members to be able to represent people, I'd want to see as much stronger evidence base than what we've currently got, which is, I mean, and thank you to Councillor Marshall for suggesting, it's probably about 3 times in the last couple of years, maybe once a year-ish that you go over. There's no evidence base here in terms of actually how long a member's speaking for. There's no evidence base here in terms of what is a major application and how long do people speak for on that. When there are technical issues, how long do people speaking on that? We're just not making an evidence-based decision here. What's happening is we've got a lot of people with a lot of opinions, all having an argument about their different opinions, but there's no way to kind of cut through that. So I think we need to recognise that lack of an evidence base is probably what's causing a lot of the difficulties in arriving at a consensus here. Potentially, if that evidence base could be gathered over the next period of months, and just within that, I think we would want to make sure that the evidence base is collected over a 6-month period, so this can be put to bed before the next set of elections. What I wouldn't want is potentially a new raft of councillors coming in, being presented with a load of evidence about, this is what happens with planning applications, having not been through that process themselves. I remember what it was like when I was early 2019 when I was a first-term councillor. So I think there is probably a window to gather a bit of evidence over the next few months and potentially look at this again when we've got an evidence base to be able to cut through some of this this difficulty that people are having in terms of reaching a consensus. And then the second point, just on this calling issue, planning meetings when they're called in that way are necessarily adversarial. That's the construction they're built, and I'm using the word adversarial and not confrontational because they are one and not the other. It is about somebody presenting a report and other people either supporting or opposing that report or suggesting that there are things they disagree with. If you're going to have that structure, and it does have to be that structure, it's the only way that planning can function. If you're going to have an adversarial meeting, it is an absolute nonsense that one of the two parties who might be making a comment on this would have an advantage, whatever that advantage is in terms of timescales. That's my 2 pence on those.
Lovely, thank you. Anybody else? So, Tom, you've listened to all the discussion that's gone on in our meeting this evening. We will obviously put some views back to you, but it would seem that we've got an ONS meeting in March, 16th of March, which might be an opportunity for you to bring back perhaps an evidence-based report back to us so that we can have some more information and detail and some facts and data that we could perhaps give some more comment on.
Okay.
But in the meantime, we will feed back to you what we've discussed this evening, back to you for your consideration and for your planning committee to consider. And our suggestion would be that perhaps you would like to bring back a paper in March with perhaps some evidence-based data that we could look at, and then we can make a proper response back to you and back to the planning committee. Does that seem sensible to you, Tom?
Okay, Mike. No, that's absolutely fine. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you, Mike.
Tom, can I just ask, in the meantime, are we on the new measures now? Is it down to your discretion at the moment of planning application time?
Mike, at the moment, it is according to the current protocol. Yes, it is. Yeah. Mike, can I just make a point, please? So I know we've had this lengthy discussion this evening. The only matter that is up for discussion in terms of the times for people to speak is for ward councillors. It's an accepted fact that everybody else gets 5 minutes. That's incontrovertible, and I don't think we're even discussing that now.
No, that's right. Yeah, and also
the whole argument revolves around how much time does a ward councillor get. Mike, can I just say, And from my experience, even when ward councillors have requested 10 minutes, it is frequently the case that they finish well before 10 minutes have elapsed. That's my experience, if I'm being perfectly.
Yeah, that's fine. Well, then you're having a bit of time back. That's fine. That's fine, Tom. I haven't got an issue. And maybe, Tom, we just need to look at the
That's
actual.
fine, Mike.
Can we also just have a look at the calling procedures as well? Just tighten those up to see actually how that fits around as well for us.
Yes, Mike, I realise that is slightly contentious, and I know that your vice chairman and also Councillor Grange have had issues with that, and I fully understand the implications, so that I'm aware of that.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
So you're happy, you can do that, Tom. Thank you. You are free
I
to
think
leave.
so, Mike.
You are free to leave and rejoin the party, Tom.
That's very kind. I'm just off to the sherry reception now.
Oh, lovely. Very nice. Okay. Our members happy that
Thank you
we
very much.
thanks, Tom. Our members happy that we go along on those lines outlined by Councillor Robson, and that bring a paper back in March when we've got more data, more information, and give us a chance to look at it in more detail. Okay. Thank you very much. We'll move on
Thank you
now.
very much, everyone.
Thank you, Thomas.
I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night. And we'll move on.
Bye-bye.
Fine. We'll
Just go.
gonna end it. Well, someone switch the plug off. It's not going to end it. We'll move on to task groups. Good evening, Councillor. How are you, Deb Baker?
I'm fine. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Because I apologise in advance. Internet where I am is not on fibre optics yet, and we've got a storm.
Oh dear. Well, be as brief as you want then.
So, I've been asked to do an update on the new leisure centre task group, some members of which are sitting in the room, I can see. So, briefly, the task group was set up in March 2020, can you believe it? And then by the Leisure and Park and Overview and Scrutiny Committee, as was then, and later endorsed by the new Overview and Scrutiny Committee as it is now. The members are, those who there are Councillor Grange, Councillor Ray, Councillor Sylvester Hall, Councillor Robertson, obviously myself, and now Councillor Matthews, who has replaced Councillor Wilcox, obviously, as he's now taken over chairing the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Our terms of reference are very much focused on the new leisure facility, not the existing Priory Grange. So obviously that we take into account information about its operation and the user profile. And the work plan with timelines was developed. And amazingly, despite COVID, reassessments, funding issues, slippage is only a matter of months rather than years, which is fantastic. And that is all credit to officers as well as task group members. We've had, I think, 9 formal meetings in that time, and I have regular monthly update meetings with the officers and also with portfolio holders as and when it's necessary. Most of the deliberations and discussions, etc., we've had have been very practical, I would say very spirited, and I feel that we have a lovely task group and everybody is working together as a team with each other and with officers and the portfolio holder. So that way we are very positive and driving the potential to build the thing. As you know, funding has been an issue back and forth, but we now obviously have a potential rough bidding and also the capital allowance that has been there. So at the moment, we're waiting to see which way we go. The things that we have assessed over the last year has been very much the site selection, as you know, and the reasoning for that. And we've had lots of discussions around the appropriate sites and the ultimate decision, which has been endorsed, to go for Switchbook. We also assessed the needs and operations of a leisure centre in a formal manner. We've had the section 122 consultation, and the 122 consultation doesn't seek, interestingly, positive views. It's the real reason for objections, which I find very difficult given the consultation is my background, that it's just that way. but it's given us lots of ideas and aspects and issues we need to take into account going forward. We're ongoing with communication plans, keeping in touch with stakeholders, partners, and through to individual potential users. And we're also looking, as we move forward, to likely mitigations that will be needed to ensure the future smooth passage of the project and the build of a new leisure facility for all of Lichfield District and particularly the city. We've also looked at co-location opportunities and partner opportunities, and these have been assessed not just by the task group, but in great detail by officers and cabinet members and those other people involved. The appropriation for Stitchbrook was given the go-ahead at our last task group and then commended by the Odeon Scrutiny and Cabinet, and that is well on its way, almost complete. The timing of that was very important because it needed to match in with the 122 consultation, so that didn't need to be repeated, and obviously we're saving money there and keeping things efficient. The next steps are very much looking at outline planning through to main planning, and within that, the task group will be meeting when we get a date to discuss all the issues that have been raised and might be raised so that we can look at appropriate mitigation. And this is through from active travel, through to working with other partners in terms of roads and highways. And we know there's developments happening off Eastern Avenue as we speak, and also making sure that we can get an ecological uplift because there are concerns there about the trees, the green space, hedgerows, etc. And as you all know, that is an area very close to my heart, so that will not be let go. And then we're also looking at taking to outline planning potentially reserved issues, reserved matters to potential models, depending very much on long-term budget. We decided against a total modular approach in that we need the facility as outlined from day one, which is the swimming pool with an appropriate facility to enable learners, community space, gym space. But the design will, as requested sensibly by the task group, also allow flexibility for the long-term future. This has got to be there for 20, 40 years. Our population will change, needs will change. We've got a lot of new development, so it's not just an aging population, it's hopefully young people as well. So the design will incorporate that. And again, on the request from the task group, to ensure that we do take into account climate change and make sure that the design is as economically and ecologically and environmentally appropriate as possible. I think that's probably a good overview of where we got to, Mike.
Lovely, thanks ever so much, Councillor Baker, that's fine. I'm just going back into the room now and see if we've got any questions or observations from members. Councillor Latham.
Yeah, we came on the decision to have this centre after that rather strange meeting at the Garrick Theatre some years ago. Having done a lot of research on it from my previous life running the ONS committee, I found that no more than 4% of a target audience attend leisure centres around the country. What is the average? Have we worked out a running cost for this centre? Have we worked out what the membership fees would be? And we're looking at a figure of about 1,400 to 1,500 people. Will it run at a loss? Is it viable financially? Can it be done?
Thank you,
The plan is, yes, it will become financially viable. Officers have been looking at the costs and the long-term running and also how it will be run. This is an open meeting, so I don't want to go into sort of too much detail there, but we're certainly looking to make sure it is a viable facility for the long term. You know, this is not a quick hit. and this is to the benefit of the health and well-being also of our district, which again is part of our overall strategy. So there are a lot of positive impacts on wider budgets, and the running of it will be important. We haven't looked at the operational side in terms of membership fees, etc., because that is not part of the current terms of reference of this. But rest assured, they are not being ignored by our financial officers, project managers, and certainly not by our portfolio holder. Did I see David, Councillor Robertson, put his hand up?
Hang on, Dave, I'm the chairman. I'll tell you who's going to speak. You just sit in your hotel room in Crete. Councillor Latham, David Latham, are you happy?
Yeah, as long as these concerns are addressed, I think we must be aware that our population, those who use it, will expect it to be cheaper than the existing leisure centres with pools in the district. And I don't have a feeling that that will be the case. Well, most council establishments are cheaper than the commercial ones.
Councillor Grange.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm a little concerned that we're going back around the loop and challenging the business case at this stage. I think we've made that decision. The argument now is, having made that decision, how do we increase usage of it? We know, and Councillor Baker picks up the point, the leisure centre picks up all sorts of things like cardiac rehabilitation, mental health. I'm repeating myself. I've said all of this before. If we are, for any reason, getting to a point where we think we are going to backpedal on that decision to build a new leisure centre in the city of Lichfield, I think we need to be saying that very clearly, because we will then have campaigns and protests again, I should imagine.
Thank you. Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was just reminding Councillor Latham that there were 11,000 people who wanted to see this new leisure centre built to replace the Ferrari Grange Centre, which we are going to lose over the coming years. Ferrari Grange is currently a going concern. The reason it has to close is the age of the building and the facility, and some interesting decisions that were made around leases and delineating who was responsible for maintenance. So on that basis, there should be no concern over a new modern facility maintaining its profitability. The point that I want to come in though is regarding the communications plan. I know I've said this at council twice, and I've said it, I think, every single one of the task group meetings that I've been able to make. I couldn't make the last one. Stitchwell Park is obviously in my ward. I still get regularly contact from constituents. You still see it online. The last time the leader put an article into Lichfield Live, the first 3 comments were all exactly the same thing that I have been raising for a period of years, and I have been consistently saying that this council needs to tell the story to our residents better about the reason why Stitchwell Park was chosen. And despite how many times I bring this up at various different committees, the council has still never chosen this story, because the consistent question that I get asked is, why aren't you putting it on Friars Gate? Why aren't you putting it on Birmingham Roadside? Now, I know the answer. I'm pretty sure everybody in this room knows the answer. I'm pretty sure that the people watching on YouTube know the answer, but that story about why it hasn't got out into the wider public, and it is an absolutely essential part of what we must do, because people are concerned about losing some of that green space, and a lot of people don't realise they're only using some of that green space. And in terms of Councillor Baker's ecological point earlier, the copse of trees that is there isn't going to be damaged. We've been assured that when we've raised it at the task group. Problem is this council is not telling that story to our residents, which is leading to a lot of concern for our residents that we're going to be pulling up some green space where, in their view, there is an alternative. Now, we know that financially that alternative is not available, but we have got to tell that story to our residents. And for some reason, no matter how many times I raise it, we've never managed to do that communications piece. And I think it's absolutely essential that we do.
Yeah, well, hopefully the people in this room will have heard that. And let's make sure we document that, and we'll pass that back to the people in that area, in the comms team, etc., Councillor Robertson, to make sure that we start looking at putting together that story of actually what's going to happen and how it's going to develop, so that the members of the public are with us, as opposed to not knowing what's going on and see us as not knowing what we're doing. So you're right, we do need to put that comms message out and that story out, and it'll be obviously down to the people involved as to how much they want to say, but I think we do need to start telling that story from an early date. Any other comments, anybody? Deb? Councillor Baker, heard the comments there,
Yes,
the council,
that's
particularly
fine.
around communication.
I totally agree with Councillor Robertson, and that is on the agenda for our next task group. But equally, I think it is something we need to get moving now.
Is there a likelihood, Councillor Baker, that we will also know a bit more about the planning application and potential capital funding at your next task group? That likely to be discussed?
Yes, that is
Right.
certainly on my agenda.
Great, that's good. Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us this evening from Crete. Thank you for giving your time up and enjoy the rest of your holiday. And you can go.
Thank you very
Back
much.
to the bar.
Carol, bye.
Thank you very much, Councillor Baker. Okay, folks, so we will move on to our next item, which is to receive the updates of the work of the County Council Health, Care, Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I did send out to you this morning. We happened to meet yesterday, which is quite good, really, in the sense that I was able to put a report together that giving you the details of that meeting that we had yesterday, together with the meeting that we had at the beginning of August. So we did report on the first meeting, but yesterday's meeting, as I said, I'm not going to go over the report because I've sent it to you, so you have got that. And I said in the report, if there's any further information you want from that, please don't hesitate to come to me. What was important from yesterday's meeting was the piece around the district and boroughs updates, because primarily we're there representing the district and boroughs in our capacity of district councillors. And certainly we still have concerns about the George Bryant Centre. A business case is being looked at by the ICB, that is ongoing. And we're told that will come back to us at the spring of next year. But we are certainly seeing a lot of activity from Tamworth, and in particular from the lady that represents Tamworth, Mrs. Councillor Claymore, who has got a number of events that are going to be taking place where they're going to actually be asking the public to actually support a potential petition that may come forward to keep the centre in Tamworth open. We also received another letter from the Right Honourable Chris Pincher, again supporting the idea of keeping the centre open. So we will continue to pursue that ourselves and Tamworth to make sure that all the issues that we have around moving to Stafford, in as much as transport arrangements, how will patients get there, the logistics of actually going to Stafford as opposed to being in Tamworth, to make sure that our residents of both Lichfield and Tamworth are not adversely affected in order to get the help and support that they need at the centre that's been running at the George Bryant Centre. Councillor Latham also asked a question around the funding following the fire. I've also responded to that and sent that round to you, that the insurance payout was nothing like what was expected to pay out on the damage done to the building. So that's been utilised in other areas. But that one area we continue to push. The other area that is a slight concern to us now is that they're almost backpedaling on the potential reopening of Samuel Johnson's maternity services at the end of this year. The big problem they have is there are not enough midwives at this moment in time. So we've asked that they come back to our meeting in November to update us exactly whether or not the maternity services are going to be reintroduced. Because the idea was that come the new year, their services were going to be reintroduced in Lichfield. So we've asked for an update to say exactly whether or not that is going to happen, if they've managed to get enough staff to open the centre again. And then finally, I know Councillor Evans has mentioned on numerous occasions about mental health and children's mental health. We've asked that a paper comes back now that there's ring fencing being put aside by the County Council to deal with mental health and care in the community for adults and children. We've asked that a paper come to our meeting in November again, so that we can see exactly what it's been doing and what part we can play as a district or borough in supporting that and making sure that all the needs of all our residents are met. So anybody, yes, Councillor Evans.
Yeah, well, you know that I've raised all those issues in the past a number of times. Regarding the Samuel Johnson, I think that it's vital, and I've said that before, that if possible, that unit is kept. It was a purpose-built unit with birthing pools. It seems ridiculous that they then abandon it. There must be midwives around that they can be redirected from other places in order to fulfill the need for the people in this district. That I've said before, if if you're in labour and you've got to go up the A38, particularly the A38 as it is now, it's not easy, and it's not fair to put women into that situation. So I hope that they do reconsider that and sort out something, because I know that there are midwives around that hopefully would be quite happy to work in that midwife-led unit. And it's only people who have got problems that need to be moved to other hospitals. And mothers themselves, I think, would be much better off being aware that the Samuel Johnson unit is available to them. Regarding the George Bryan Centre, I think that is a centre that is needed within the area, and I hope that they rethink on that. I know that they're using this word transformation, and transformation can mean, well, we're cutting back on the money. I know I'm glad to see that the money's been ring fenced, because in the past my understanding was that money has been moved across to the acute system, but the basic problem is there is not enough money in the National Health Service to fund everything that is necessary. But that doesn't mean to say that people in our district should suffer as a result of that. And the George Bryan, when it was used, was a well-used centre for particularly for people with acute mental health problems. So I hope that is considered, although from what I understand and what I've heard, we're going to have quite a big battle on our hands to get the George Bryan Centre, or what was the George Bryan Centre in the past, up and running again. The mental health issues, I'm glad that it looks as though it's coming forward a bit, because it was listed to be in March, which I have said in the past is far too long for mental health with COVID, that have experienced and are experiencing mental health issues. You know that I'm concerned about children's mental health and young adults' mental health. I've watched 2 programs on the television recently on suicide in young people, which is absolutely shocking. And people with severe mental health needs, the issues have not been addressed. And that's why this word transformation bothers me, because the idea is that people are out in the community. When St Matthew's Hospital closed, however many years ago that was, people were put into the community then for the same reason, and it did not work. And there are a lot of people within the community that have got mental health issues that are not being addressed. And that I know that in the 2 schools that I work in, that there are children that are having some severe mental health issues that need to be sorted now, because, as I've said before, if they're not sorted now, they'll go into adulthood and they still have those issues. So I think that is an important thing to be considered. And I hope when you go there that you can say all these things, because to me, people have missed out. And this word transformation bothers me, because it can mean a multiple of things, and one of those being, well, it'll be cheaper to run it within the community, and it won't necessarily, because even units that have been set up in Burntwood haven't always worked as effectively as they were expected to. And we get told again that there aren't enough people to actually support these people. And I really feel that issues needing addressed, because sometimes when these people are in the community, they get ridiculed, and it's not their fault. And it's hard when you see that people are not getting the help and support that they need. So I hope that this transformation is not an excuse for a cheaper service, because what we've got to do, and we've got to ensure, because we're the voice for the people out there, that mental health issues are vital, both having lost the George Bryan Centre as well. And we're told that there are sufficient places at St George's. Not only, like you said, is that a long way to go, transport isn't all that easy, but it does fulfill a need for people over this side of the area. So I hope that all those things are moved ahead sooner rather than later, because in the meantime, people are suffering.
I think, Councillor Evans, your points are well made. And certainly when they were putting the business case together for the movement to St George's, many of us around the table said the issues were around costs, transport, getting people there, getting people home. It's not just as simple as saying, oh, by the way, we have a new centre that does everything, but it's in Stafford. So all that hopefully will be taken in consideration by the Integrated Care Board, who will be reporting back to us next year. But the more that we can do and get support of others, and particularly Tamworth seem very much on the front foot with doing this, and I've said that we will support whatever initiative they do because it affects our residents too. I'll let members know whenever that comes forward. The other thing to say is I think unfortunately the committee seems to have been sort of overtaken by wanting to know GP waiting lists, wanting to know hospitalisation, numbers of people waiting ambulances, and all that sort of area, which is all very important. But unfortunately, on the back of that, other areas like mental health have sort of slipped back, and therefore it's been put back on the agenda now. But I think it's fair to say that most people around that table yesterday were actually saying, yes, we need to have this brought to the table now, because there are implications post-COVID about mental issues in our schools and in adult population that we need to address. Otherwise, as you rightly say, we hear the television, we watch the television programs all the time about the awful situations that happen in certain parts of the community. So, no, you can rest assured that I will make sure that when it comes in November, that we get at least to know where the money is going to be spent and how it will affect the residents of our district. Thank you for that. Councillor Eagland.
Well, I think you said it all. I remember this George Bryan Centre has been on our minds for a long time. When I was on the Health Scrutiny Committee at County, we brought, since the fire when it happened, and we were fighting them for the replacement of the George Bryan Centre. And to be honest with you, there isn't the room and the facilities in Stafford that can replace what we had at George Bryan Centre. And I'm very pleased to hear that we're joining forces with Tamworth, because I can remember when I and David Latham and the councillors from Tamworth were always bringing this subject up over and over again about it's a service that we must replace. It's too important. There's too many people suffering out there with mental disorder, and not ones that can be done with a tablet or a little conversation now and again. So I agree with everything that's been said this evening, and I'm glad we're moving on it. And as regards Samuel Johnson, we've got to have that back. We've got to have a maternity unit there. That hospital was replacing the Victoria Hospital that they took away from us on the promises that we would have a function village hospital, and that was the replacement. Why should we have to go to a second-hand way of going about getting the mother giving a safe birth? No, we need to fight this cause, and I would encourage anyone to join anything, or even in a protest of getting that hospital back to how we want it. Thank you.
It's certainly worth knowing as well that we've got two other members of the district council who actually sit on the committee, in as much as Richard Cox is the vice chair and also Janice Sylvester Hall. Both are actual members of the committee, voting members on the committee. I'm just there as a representative on the district council. So again, these are the people we need to make sure we're lobbying to make sure they understand. And Janice was there yesterday, so she heard the story firsthand. So yeah, we do need to keep the pressure on, because otherwise things will be done to us and it'll be too late to do anything about it. So you can rest assured, everybody, that we will certainly keep pushing that at the county council level with the support of the other members of that committee. Councillor Hope.
Thank you, Chair. I would very much like to align myself with the comments of Councillor Evans and Councillor Eagland on the subject of Samuel Johnson maternity ward. My first child was delivered there by my wife back in 2018, and the facility is very modern, and the staff there are nothing less than excellent. I think it would be a great disservice for mums to be in both Burnwood and Lichfield if that was taken away from us permanently. it's not only important to a mum's physical health and the baby's health as well, but also the mother's mental health, to be given the opportunity to give birth in the way that she would like to give birth, whether that be at home, whether that be in a hospital like Burton-upon-Trent, or whether it's delivered by a midwife in a midwife-led centre as well. Thank you.
Anybody else? Any comments on the health update? Sort of got ourselves really worked up there, haven't we, on that? But they are important issues, so we will pursue them. And we'll make sure that we hopefully get the outcomes that we want for our residents. Thank you. Okay, with that, we'll move on to the next item, which is the medium-term financial strategy.
Oh.
So this will be easy. This will be easy reading for us all. Councillor Stratton and Anthony Thomas will deliver. I don't know whether you were here, Councillor Stratton, at the start of the meeting. We have a hefty agenda this evening. And bearing in mind that these papers have been out, so members will have completely been all over them for the last couple of weeks. So if you can keep your presentation brief and to the point, that will help our debate and help us get through the agenda. Thank you.
I'll keep it as brief as I can, Leader. This is the finance team sorry, Chair. Former Leader. Yeah, it's the finance team here to add a note of levity to a heavy agenda. Any member in this room would have noticed that the world of finance in this country has been moving rather quickly in the last couple of weeks. And so that there are elements in this paper that are already going to be several iterations out of date. And so before I do open the paper, I know that Anthony is quite keen to give you a bit of a place setter. And so I'll invite him to do that first, and then I'll open the paper.
Yeah, so as Councillor Strachan said, it's the paper we did about a month ago, just over a month ago, is a position statement, and there are chunks of it that are now out of date. So I thought I'd bring members up to date because this is fast moving in pace in terms of what's going on. So I'm just going to cover spending review last year and core spending power, medium term fiscal plan, which the government announced very recently and changed yesterday, how that impacts local government funding, energy bill relief scheme, usable reserve trends, business rate pooling. So nice little selection of things that have changed very recently. So this is last year's spending, and I don't want to, there's a lot of numbers on here, but there's a couple of things I want to point out to members. So there's a line, the second line, or sorry, the line down grant funding and core spending power. You can see the percentage increases there. So in 22-23, there's a large increase, 7.9%, and then it was flat. That looked like a good settlement back then, but that's the important thing to note now is there's nothing in there for inflation going forward in light of the increased inflation level. Second point I want to make out here is that includes council tax income. So there is an assumption in the government's core spending power figures that councils will raise their council tax by the maximum allowable level and that they will have council tax base growth. So that isn't money that the government gives us, it's basically permission to allow you to raise more money locally. And just to show it in a graph, again, there's a lot of numbers here, but the two I want to concentrate on are the blue bar in the middle, which is council tax, and you can see that's increasing in proportion terms. So whilst the funding is increasing, a bigger proportion is being funded locally through council taxpayers. I think that's quite important to note that. And you'll see a hashed green boxes at the bottom of the funding that comes through business rates and revenue support grant, and they're reducing. Another one I want to point out, new homes bonus. So you can see this came in 11-12. It reached its zenith in about 16-17, but each year subsequently it's reduced, and it's dropped significantly in the last 3 years because there's been one-off payments. At the moment, there is money in the funding settlement for it, but whether it survives the next year or so is a question that's still to be answered. Just on the medium-term fiscal plan, so the Chancellor released a statement 26th of September that he would publish a medium-term fiscal plan on the 23rd of November. That was promptly updated yesterday with the turmoil in the market, that it will be published later this month. It'll set out further details on fiscal rules, so how debt will be reduced as a share of GDP. OBR will publish a full forecast alongside that fiscal plan. Again, that's been updated. and there's a couple of points I want to make. The government has made it clear it wants to stick to spending settlements for this spend review settlement period. So that implies there's unlikely to be additional funding for local government in that period. And the budget will be published in the spring with further OBR forecasts. So just in terms of local government funding, so there's a couple of interviews that happened in the last few days. So on the BBC Radio 4 Today show, the Chancellor suggested that they would be sticking to the spending review level. That's likely to mean some real-term public sector funding cuts because inflation isn't going up. Or inflation is higher than the estimate that we used previously. The local government minister told the Local Government Chronicle that local government won't be immune from those cuts. And he also reiterated that every department's received a letter from the Chancellor telling them to make efficiency savings. Now, again, he made play of the fact that there was an extra 2.7 billion given to councils. Part of that was based on inflation projections as it was last year, and a large chunk of that, so 1.4 billion of that is council tax income. So again, it's not extra money, it's permission to actually raise money locally to fund services. Just a couple of other points. So in our projections, we've increased the cost of energy and utility costs. The government recently announced an energy bill relief scheme for businesses and other non-domestic customers to partly mitigate this impact. It's around the level of tariff, and I believe it's for a 6-month period at the moment. It doesn't actually specify local authorities are eligible, but I think it's assumed that local authorities will fall within its scope. There are other organisations, though, like outsourced leisure providers, etc., that aren't within that scope necessarily. The point to make on this, though, is it's not quite as generous as the headlines say. So there isn't actually a cap. There's a cap up to a point, and then it actually becomes you're left to fund the difference. So at the moment, we're trying to work through those numbers because this only came up fairly recently as to what level of support that gives the council. But it isn't we will fund all additional costs above a level, and it is for only a short period at this point in time. So there is still an element of exposure to those costs. I just wanted to flick on to usable reserve trends because a lot of camps have been published recently. So back to 12-13 through to 21-22, you can see level of reserves increased. The top bar is district councils, which have had the biggest increase, largely because district councils have probably been exposed to the most risk with the changes in local funding through business rates and ERAM's bonus. But you see the big spike in 2021, that was the COVID money that was paid in advance, which is now starting to drop off. Just for comparison purposes, so the district council, we were at 40%, excluding restricted reserves, and 54% including back in 12-13, which was around the average at that time, maybe slightly below district council levels. When we got to 21-22, we're at 161 and 202. So again, we're not too far adrift from the district councils or council trend there. Just on business rate pooling then. So again, we received an email inviting us to submit a proposal to remain in the business rate pool for Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent. We opted to remain in it, so we've submitted that. All authorities in Staffordshire and Stoke submitted. If that's successful, based on latest projections, that will mean we as a district council retain nearly 400,000 business rate income that would otherwise be paid to the government. County will receive extra funding, likewise police and fire as a result of that. We'll get an outcome on whether that pool stays in place in the finance settlement in December. That's it. That's all I wanted to cover, really. Happy to take views and questions now.
Yeah, should we take some questions there? If anyone's got any for Anthony, just on those sort of slides that he just showed us. Anybody got any observations or questions or clarifications required? Councillor Grange.
Always the probably one that goes first, isn't it? I guess I'm interested to get both Anthony's view and also cabinet members' view on the level of risk that's now inherent in this NTFS. Clearly, we're in a period of time, I think turmoil is probably an understatement of what's happened on the markets recently. So are there any key risk areas that they think we should be looking at? I'm interested in getting a view of paragraph 3.22, which details the difference between the budget pressures and the inflationary pressures. In broad terms, the budget pressures we should be in control of, the inflationary pressures are out with our control and we just have to manage them. But a budget pressure of 687,000 quid detailed out in Appendix B. I'm interested to understand why some of our internal savings are not being delivered, despite them being in the MTFS. I'm interested to understand why there's yet another £2 million being proposed to spend on Birmingham Road site in paragraph 3.65. And just for my own understanding, and it's a conversation that Councillor Strachan and I have most years, how many responses have you had to the budget consultation today? Thank you.
You want to take those first and then we'll go to anybody else.
Yeah, so on the key risk areas, probably a lot of it is there, to be honest. I mean, if you take from payroll, which is our biggest cost, there is a pay offer out at the moment, which I think one of the three unions has accepted, which is used, and I think the other two are still deliberating. That headlined at a 4% increase, but it actually is about £1,925 per employee, which actually works out a much higher percentage increase. Also in that pay award, there is the provision for an extra day's annual leave for next year. That potentially adds extra cost into areas like waste collection. I think most contracts have got an element of risk around them, depending on the clauses in it. We've then got things like income areas. How much do we increase and what's the price elasticity of any usage that's there? So, you know, if we increase it by a certain percentage, does the demand drop off? It compensates. We've got borrowing potentially for the leisure centre, which we forecasted just shy of 3%. I think earlier this week, we was running at 5%. That could well increase further, depending on what the Bank of England does in terms of inflationary pressures. I think you then go to sort of council tax, where you've got potential collection rates, disposable income dropping, business rates similarly, with the impact of potentially people spending less in shops. That knocks on potential income. So, you know, there are significant elements of the budget that are at risk. I'm not exposed to wider economic turmoil. I have done a little bit of work on the minimum level of reserves, but it probably is not unsurprising that I'm probably going to have to look to increase that, just because of the volatility in the inflation and the collection. So I know that's not a very good summary of it, but I think unfortunately, I mean, every year I think I say I've never known such uncertainty. And every year I come back here and it gets worse, and it is incredibly difficult to do any sort of forecasting of any longevity at the moment with what's going on.
Historically, of course, the problem is that the local government have always been the element that's been there to make all the savings for the national government. And we've been asked year after year after year to make efficient savings, which we have done, you know, and I just worry that's coming around again, and stuff like the business rate bill, although there's an invitation to join, there's nothing to say that the government won't at some stage actually say, actually, we're going to withdraw this because we need this funding more so than local government do. So those sort of things, Anthony, as well as, you know, the issues you give on the fuel and the utilities. And at the bottom on your table at 3.23, the more pessimistic scenario is probably going to be coming more into play as we go forward. You know, being a well-run authority that we are, we're going to have to look at those areas because they're going to be big areas that we need to make sure that we've got enough funding to deliver the services that we want to do. So, you know, I really do, sympathise with the situation at the moment, because it seems to be changing on a daily basis and to who you listen to as to what's going to happen. Anybody else got any observations? Councillor Robertson.
I had a question.
Sorry, Councillor Graham, did we not get them all?
No,
Sorry.
that was only the first one.
Oh, okay.
So if I remember right, your second one was around the difference around budget pressures and inflation pressures. So I think the budget pressures are ostensibly down to savings we built into the medium-term financial strategy around restructure, so the implementation of the target operating model, and in some cases increasing fees and charges. So car parking, I think, was the principal one. It was probably it felt like a realistic scenario at the time we were doing the budget that we would be able to get the target operating model in by the start of the financial year, which got savings in. I think as we've moved through the process and undertaken consultation, it's become clear that that probably was an over-optimistic target, and therefore it will, well, it has or will come in 1st of October. So we've built in half-year savings. That effectively means that we will have to use general reserves to balance that shortfall between a full year and a half year. The car park one, I don't know whether Councillor Strachan wants to take that one, but there was an assumption that we would increase car parking charges for the financial year, but I think the decision's been taken probably in light of what's happening in the wider economy that wasn't the wise thing to do. So again, that's a budgetary shortfall which will fund from general reserves in the short to medium term. I think your last point was the £2 million BRS. Do you want me to take that one?
That's
You
more
know
a
what it is.
political question,
Yeah.
Anthony, thank you.
Well, Joe, we can't leave it like it is forever. We're going to have to bring it forward and develop it at some point. And so we took the view that as part of this wider review of reserves, that we would release some of it to start to get the site ready to actually bring forward. And so that enabling works is the early part of that process. No decision has yet been taken on what is going to happen there, in what phases, and what is going to go where. But ultimately, I can't leave it looking like the rubbish pit that it currently is ad infinitum. It's sat like that for long enough. So let's get it moving. The budget is likely to be a realistic one for clearance and decontamination. We'll come back with an update when there is one to give. Chairman, would you like to give a more general oversight before Councillor Robertson asks his questions, or?
Are your questions in relation to Anthony Thomas's slides, or should we let Rob do his report? You carry on, Rob.
Only as a brief opening, because I know that you asked me for that. This is this paper's first pass-through scrutiny, and so this is the truly consultative phase where we genuinely are listening to you, and in front of me is a blank piece of paper on which I'm going to write down all the clever things you're going to say, which will then be built in and considered and assessed as part of the budget process. And I know, Chairman, that you want this to come back in December, January time. And that will be a point at which hopefully we'll be able to adopt some of the ideas that Scrutiny has had, or discount them because they were simply impractical, or we'd already done it in a different way. The early part of the paper, I know Anthony has already dealt with. It contained a number of assumptions. Those assumptions were blown out of the water by recent economic events in many cases. They were put together with our customary pessimism, and I do note the observation from Councillor Eady at Cabinet a couple of weeks ago that even our customary pessimism appeared to be a little over-optimistic. It might be the first recorded instance of the finance team in this council being optimistic, but there it is. And those inflationary assumptions at 3.9 and the revenue budget assumptions at 321 you've already dealt with. There are some genuinely alarming numbers there. And I note that they do reinstate that funding gap in the first year of this, which we do propose to meet from general reserves. It's the sum of just slightly over £1 million. It's not all bad news, because I can say that we have money coming forward from the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. I don't know whether Councillor Eady and his team will want to draw attention to that later, but you'll see that there's a proposed investment plan present at 3.42. And Mr. Percival's asked me to tell you that we've also been earmarked £400,000 from the Rural England Prosperity Fund, for which we'll need to prepare an investment plan. And our deadline for that is the 30th of November. So we'll start looking forward to plan to access that. But it sounds optimistic that there should be some funds coming forwards. I can't actually read that note, so I'm not going to say anything. And Councillor Grange has already referred to the resolution of Cabinet at 3.65, the release of 5.1 million pounds worth of reserves that are either no longer needed or are dealt with elsewhere, or where we'd overcommitted and we actually don't need to spend that much, of which 2 million will be going into the capital programme, and the remainder we will use for other projects as we go forwards. But the key areas of consultation that I'm really keen to hear from Scrutiny this evening are on council tax, because you'll see a little later on in the paper that the local council tax support scheme is currently under consultation. It's under consultation to the 16th of October. I believe in the paper, Councillor Grange, we referred to having 1,500 responses, which on a local council tax support scheme consultation, I think is rather optimistic, because it's not the full budget consultation. That one's not open yet. We do have a preferred option. There has been a positive response so far, and I'm particularly pleased to hear that Staffordshire County Council are supportive, given that they are really the main interested party in this, given their share of council tax. And I'd be interested to hear committees' comments or observations on what we can do to better deploy those local council tax support schemes to support residents in this area. And the other area, which I know that Anthony and Councillor Grange have already touched on, is the rate of council tax. I will reassure the committee that no decision has been made yet on that. The projections on our various options, you'll see at 3.93. I have huge disquiet around any projection that assumes there will be a maximum council tax increase year on year on year, for a number of reasons. But the main two is that I believe it's lazy economics, but also I believe it takes people who are potentially struggling for granted, and I'm not prepared to do that here. And so that will be a very careful decision that we take. I will have to protect the council's position because inflation is increasing for us as well, and there are things that we need to fund, but it will be a balancing exercise that I do not take lightly. And yes, I think that will be the source of the main reasons of my hand-wringing and the hand-wringing of this cabinet in the coming months. I know that Councillor Robertson is waiting in the wings, but if there are any other questions or comments, I'll answer as many as I possibly can. But realistically, if I can't answer them, I'm listening to what you're saying, because this is forming part of the emergent budget and we haven't made the final decisions yet.
Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sure it will be no surprise to anyone that I've got a few points. Do you want to go three at a time, or?
Yes, that would be good on
Yeah. So the first one on 315, in relation to negative support, negative RSG. I was under the impression that if they're sticking to the current spending review, I was hoping that all talk of negative RSG had been thrown out, because it's literally the dumbest idea that any human being's ever had. Are we at risk of that with any of the changes? Just effectively, just to clarify for myself. 317, what we can set aside windfall for and things along those lines. One thing I'd like to feed in and hopefully have some officers look into, we have a horrific employment gap between people with disabilities and able-bodied persons in the district of, I think it's around 20%. It's really significant. So I think that potentially if we have got some windfall on the revenue side, that could potentially be a very good place where we could do that, have a really significant positive impact for people in our district who are probably most deserving of support. So if I can drop that in and allow the wheels to turn, I'm not going to try and pretend to be an expert and say what we should be doing with it, but I think given that's a significant issue, it's something that we absolutely could look at. 321, in relation, I mean, that's the table where we've spoken about inflationary pressures on gas and electricity. If I can make a point here that I made over the road at the City Council a couple of weeks ago, February is literally like the dumbest month to end a support scheme, just as everybody's trying to do budgets. Is there any way that we can be asking the government very strongly to give us some clarity about what will happen after February before January? because I think that's going to be absolutely crucial to us, is whether or not that scheme is continuing in its existing form, or even if we've just got a direction, this is the way the wind will be blowing after February. Because without that information, we know it's going to end in February. There's going to be an enormous spike in Feb. We're going to have to make that decision in January. And if we haven't got any indication at all about the extension of that scheme and what will replace it, or if there's a need to replace it, or et cetera, it's going to make any decisions that we've tried to make at council in January difficult, I think, is going to be the word I'll use there.
If we do those in reverse order, then it may well be that what happens after February, and I agree with Councillor Robertson that it's a strange time to change something, given that it's just after the local government budget period. But it's not going to be the first time that we've made decisions in the dark, because we get told things very, very late in local government, as he is well aware from his experience now. We can ask. It may well be that it could form part of the emergent settlement, which we normally get in the second week in December. But we can certainly contact government and ask the question. So far as using a windfall to, if I read you correctly, I'd say closing that employment gap with enabling works to make it easier for people who are less able to work here. The head of paid services sitting behind him, I did see a few nods from the back row, and so I'm not going to say yes, I'm not going to say no, but it's something we'll definitely look at as what we can do. In terms of negative revenue support grants, I don't know whether Anthony had any intelligence before I do. If the government are going to stick to the existing spending plan, then it may well be that that's gone for 3 years, but realistically, who knows at the moment? And it genuinely is like trying to punch fog, trying to plan in this at the moment. It's painful. I don't know whether you've heard any more than I have.
No, not on that specific issue, but I think if they do some sort of 1 year or rollover settlement, which is what they've done previously, I would hazard a guess at the probability that will go, and we will probably gain the benefit of it. It's always been in there because it is the way that the government will look to redirect funding from what they call the more affluent, more councils that are able to raise more from council tax, to the less affluent, less able to raise from council. That is the way how they presented it was not helpful, let's put it like that. But I think the idea behind it and the principles behind it is something they're still looking at in terms of redirecting funding to areas of the greatest need.
Your last week? Oh, sorry, next week.
Yeah.
Maybe they are last week.
No, thank you all for those points, and I do agree. It's just a shame that Westminster aren't looking at central funding, but I will leave that point there because that's potentially a question for another committee. Next point I've got is on 371, so a bit of a jump down on page 28. The potential for additional capital investment. I know it's one of the things in the paper that you've asked for some views on, so I've got some views on those because you asked for them, so I thought I would. The additional 3.8 million that we've got won't touch the sides of the new leisure centre build if Luff doesn't come in. We are again beholden to Westminster. If they give us the funding for that, then there's a potential might be able to go ahead. I'd be reluctant to see us put in almost £4 million aside to try and plug a £15 million shortfall when we've got other pressing needs. So I think that's as much as that sports centre needs some cash thrown at it. I don't necessarily think this is the avenue to meet that need. Similar views to Councillor Grange on Birmingham Road. I think we have to make sure that we are looking at this in the round. And I think that our residents from around the district outside of Lichfield City would be very concerned if we pumped yet more money into that when we know that there's a significant need for investment in Burnham's town centre. We know that there's significant needs for investment in many of our rural communities as well. So I think that if we were going to look at throwing some of that 3.8 million towards BRS, it would be better for us as a council to be saying that this proportion of it is going there, and at the same time a proportion of it will be going to Burnham town centre or anything along those lines. The new depot, I won't read you the note that I wrote because we're being recorded. As far as I'm aware, the new strategy isn't yet in place. So it would again seem rather churlish when we have pressing investment needs now to put money aside for something that may come next year or may come the year after or may come as and when, because we know things are, I think fluid is the word I'll use down in government at the minute. So again, my view on that one would be, if the new national waste policy does need an update, we're going to be better to amend the depot that we've got rather than trying to fund another one, and that's potentially not the best use for this windfall. Bird Street regeneration. The note I have here is, don't we already have enough to do in the city centre? And then climate change, which is the next one there. I think potentially looking at things around solar PV, looking at things around insulating, that's obviously going to be something that's very important for us to meet our responsibilities to the climate emergency. It's obviously something that we're going to be able to do, and it's also going to have an impact on our revenue funding, our revenue position. So that could potentially be something that might be well received by Anthony as he's trying to take on the blazing inferno with a water pistol. On the Greenway, I like the idea of the Greenway, but I think if we are going to look into that, we would be very remiss to not find a way to ensure that there is adequate linkage from that Greenway to other public active travel methods, particularly to connect the cathedral and Chasewater. There are two major tourism hotspots. I would want to see people to be able to cycle between them, ideally, and the Greenway may form a large part of that. But I think if we're going to do that, hooking into those tourism assets is something that could be very valuable for that. And then finally, because I'm not going to say anything on ICT, CCTV, any discussions on that should seek to draw down investment from the Police Fire Crime Commissioner. I know we've recently had a significant investment in my ward in CCTV, and my residents have very much welcomed that investment. But I think if we're looking at stuff across the city centre, we should be looking at significant consultation with the police and hopefully getting some funding from PFCC. Not least because some of the informal discussions I've had with some of the police officers are saying that the CCTV we got isn't automatically placed exactly where they would want it, and there are potentially a couple of sites where, I don't want to use the word superfluous, but it's certainly not the first place they go looking.
Yep, certainly agree with him on the issue about the CCTV, and if there is any more coming forwards, then we would certainly be looking for support and partnership with those who make those decisions for the police. Your point on the Greenway and on the other additional capital investment, I note on the Greenway, I understand they're in hand and there are active thoughts taking place for those who are running it. So far as the leisure centre and Birmingham Road site, I have in mind the phrase local government equity and recognise that we cover a significant chunk of Staffordshire that is not just Lichfield City, and rest assured that that is high in my mind when considering investment, whilst also recognising the pledges we've already made and the things we've already committed to. So that they are things that we have in mind. So far as the new depot is concerned, the cabinet member is not here this evening. She's unavoidably detained elsewhere, and it may be a question that he wishes to direct to her elsewhere. But I note that these are options appraisals that are being considered and are in no way fully fleshed out policy proposals. And so it may well be that this never comes there. Finally, on the issues of climate change, I'm aware that Councillor Lax has a number of quite exciting proposals to come forward. They will break cover when they're ready, but they're not quite there yet. And so when we get to it, we will tell you more.
Councillor Robertson.
I do apologise. I use finally for that section. I've got two more comments to make. I do apologise. I will slap my own wrist on that one. The first one is on 393. The suggestion there around the potential for future council tax rises. I think one of the things that we should be modelling is what would a freeze this year look like if we then reverted to 1.5% for following years. If that is a matter of tens of thousands of pounds here and there, that's potentially a decision that members can make if we're looking at drawing down on reserves anyway. And similarly, when Cabinet are discussing this, the potential for saying, well, a freeze this year and return to 2% for the following 3 years, which over the period of the MTFS wouldn't quite average out because it's a high percentage and a smaller value. But I think to the level of accuracy that we're looking at would probably be a nil value. but obviously allow the team to go away and get the numbers on that one. And then my last one, which is actually my last one, a note under Appendix D. We're talking about £100,000 income from the property company.
Mm.
I'm a little bit sceptical about whether that might be achieved. That's probably a polite way of saying that.
I share Councillor Robertson's scepticism, but we'll see what comes forward. The new LAPCO is looking to step up in gears in the coming weeks and months, and I can see a cheerful nod from the chief executive that suggests that we may be expecting something to come forward meaningful in the near future. So far as council tax is concerned, that's not modelled because I was anxious that I'd be accused of being nakedly political if in year 4 of this council I rose council tax this year and then increased it or plan to increase in subsequent years. But your observations are taken on board, Councillor Robertson. And it may well be that in subsequent meetings we have that discussion when I have to opine that you've made that observation this evening. But it's an option. It's potentially an unlikely one because we're aware of the pressures that we as a council face. But thank you for your observation.
Anybody else had any observations on the MTFS? The only thing I would oh sorry, Councillor Evans.
Yeah, when I look at 3.71, I think that the identified potential investment is important, but you wouldn't expect me not to say that I hope that Burwood Town Council Centre does go ahead, because we've waited for years and years and years for that, and I recognise that the other things on there are important as well, but we've been promised and not had delivery of it. So I know the situation that we're all in, but the town centre definitely needs that investment, which we've been promised on a number of.
And I think, in all fairness, Councillor Evans, that feeling has been expressed through the town deal meetings that we've had as well. So yeah, absolutely, that's and I think there is a commitment from this council to be doing and supporting more in Burntwood. Put my head on the block here, but I'm sure it is. And the Greenway is another way in which you can link up as well. So that's part of it as well. The one comment I was going to make to you was the fact that if government are saying they expect council to take up the full allocation of council tax, that would suggest that they're not looking at any other way of supporting us. And also, Councillor Strachan, or even Anthony, do you think there's even a move potentially that they might even consider moving the cap on council tax increase?
Chairman, you know my views on council tax. I believe it's a regressive tax that hits everybody where they can not necessarily afford it, and it's based on 1991 property values, so it's almost certainly out of date. If the government intended that be our only source of funding, then so be it. But we shall do our level best to play fair by the people who live in this district and who we serve. And if we do have to increase it, then it's incumbent on us to make sure that we have robust support measures for those who find themselves in difficulty. For that reason, I would be very, very reluctant to even consider an increase that's right up against that current cap. I don't know whether Anthony's heard any suggestions that they might be increasing it.
No, we're not. I mean, it depends how the government want to play this. I mean, if they're going to stick to spending review, which they've indicated, my view would be is they'll stick to the caps that are in there. I think it would be difficult, and it's not on the realms of fantasy that they could increase it, but then effectively they're pushing the decision to local authorities to say, yes, we're allowing you to increase it, but in reality, are many local authorities going to do that in the current climate? You could increase it, there's no guarantee we'll get the income that you're looking to get from an increase in any case.
No, you're right. And anybody else, any comments? Can I then, on behalf of the committee, thank both Anthony and Rob for that excellent report. As I say, we have got a meeting plan to actually help formulate or give some thoughts as to future efficiency savings and ways in which we can help you. In the typical task that you have within the cabinet, Rob, and Anthony obviously is head of finance. So we've got that coming forward. So I would say to members, start giving some consideration, using the papers that you have to areas where we think we could help or assist, or there's other areas that perhaps we haven't thought of before of generating income for the council, or looking at areas to explore, because that's we're all in it together really, and it's in our interest and our residents to do whatever we can to reduce the burden on our taxpayers and yet deliver all the services that we do for them and do so well. So thank you both very much for that. We'll move on. Does anybody want a couple of minutes comfort break, or are you happy to continue with the meeting? Continue. Okay. So we're now going on to item 9, which is Lichfield District Council's investment plan for the Council UK Shared Prosperity Fund. I think Councillor Edie and Jonathan are coming to give us that paper. Thank you. And you're ready, chaps? Is it another presentation?
No, Chair, it's a verbal one because you've received the briefing paper. Committee, if I could start by obviously saying I'm grateful to Councillor Strachan for being our warm-up act. Obviously, in his presentation, what could he find for good news? Somebody else's portfolio area. So thank you, Rob.
Not in my game.
Thank you very much. And the other thing I would like to obviously draw out before we begin, Chairman, you just said in the last debate that you had, there was a commitment from this council to absolutely invest in Burntwood and the wider part of our district. That is the first thing in terms of the proposals that we have in this paper, which is to put money into Burntwood and to deliver something that, as you mentioned, through the town deal, working with Burntwood Town Council, what have they said to us is a pressing need in the area. And therefore, as daft as it sounds, we're putting our money where our mouth is, or rather, obviously, as the paper suggests to you, we're putting government's money where our mouth is. I'm conscious, Chair, that you said obviously about brevity of introduction and that the papers have been out with members for a little bit of time. This is funding that's coming to us from government. It's about putting it into obviously our communities, both to help in terms of place, in terms of skills, and in terms of, again, something that was mentioned earlier on, in terms of supporting active lives. You can obviously see through the paper, particularly obviously at Appendix 1, in terms of what are the projects that we're talking about. And I would take this opportunity to thank Jonathan for the work that he's put into preparing the paper that's in front of you. I know this was something that obviously yourself, Chair, and the Vice Chair asked for. What Jonathan has tried to do, obviously, in the second appendix is to give you a measure of the outcomes that we're looking for from the projects that we've identified and that we've submitted to government to say we would like you to give us this money and give us the green light to fund these. We wanted to obviously be transparent in the sense of obviously this is not the only options. So therefore, obviously, what you also have as a third appendix is the things that we did think about, the things that we did consider putting into our proposal, but obviously in reality, that the ones that we've got are things that we should concentrate on first. One of the questions that often comes up when we're talking about this ourselves is the ability to vary things. Now, Jonathan has been very good in the way that he has worded things in the sense of they are as loose and they are as ambiguous as they possibly can be, so that if we do need to vary, if we do need to somehow shoehorn in a different focus than necessarily how it's written, we've given ourselves the wriggle room to do that. As I understand it from my discussions with Jonathan, it will be possible to make small variances to how the money is allocated, but in principle, again, we've tried to be as fluid as we can be. I've mentioned earlier, and obviously, starting this introduction, the first thing that we've got on there in terms of investment and where do we want to see this money being used is to deliver a new community hub within Burntwood. I think that's a critical thing that, as I say, has been identified to us, and we want to stand behind making that happen. What I would say is, obviously, if you're reading this paper and thinking it's Lichfield centric, I would say to you, it is not, and it is absolutely not the case, because we've been very, very clear, both with myself and the leader, in talking to Jonathan and talking to Simon as the chief executive, that where you see something, we want it to happen across the district. So the only thing on this that you would see, that you would look at and say this is relevant to Lichfield City, is obviously some financial support to make that cinema development happen. Everything else is either related to Burntwood or it's across the district. So in terms of the incubator space, this is not about saying it's just delivering it in Lichfield, it's delivering it across the district or wherever it's relevant. something that I'm really delighted to see in there is obviously the money that is proposed to be allocated for the two elements of Us Girls and Play Streets. As members will know, I've had the good fortune in the past of being the cabinet member for leisure, and this is something I've been passionate for many years about, giving our local communities the opportunity to lead active lives. This is finally putting the money behind it to actually get that delivered, which is something, I remember Councillor Pullen saying, what are the things that are important to you when this council first met in 2019? That for me, that was something on the list, and I'm pleased to see it coming forward. We do obviously recognise that the current trading conditions are likely to deteriorate, obviously, for businesses as local families come under pressure in terms of their spending power. So again, we've got money set in there in terms of trying to continue to support our high streets wherever they are. And again, we've got further things in there that we've identified in terms of helping people obviously develop their skills, look for obviously further employment opportunities that may allow them to increase obviously their own earning potential through a higher skilled job. We've also got something that, again, we've listened to businesses in there in terms of you will see a proposal around transport assistance. Something that's been flagged up to us is obviously that our commercial bus operators don't always run the services that local businesses need to be able to get workforce to them when they actually have working hours. So again, this is something that I know that Councillor Pullen's been very passionate about. He wants to see us look at that and fund it if we can, to create more flexible, obviously, transport options for people to be able to get to work when they need to get to work. I'm going to pause, Chairman, because you obviously said keep this brief, and I'm obviously therefore more than welcome to answer any questions, and I'm grateful to Jonathan for his support as well in that.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Eadie. Where do you want to start? Who wants to kick this off then, first of all? Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Chair. Just an initial question as to, in the current climate, how, if there's any degree of risk with the funding, is it being red ringed, and also any decision when's that likely to come?
I'll take the second point first, if that's all right, Richard. We are expecting a decision this month to tell us whether or not our proposals for how we would look to spend the money have been approved or not. In terms of, is the funding in jeopardy? Councillor Strachan's unfortunately had to go off. I try and pinch his words, which is, at the moment, no, we haven't been told it's in jeopardy, but there's 24 hours in a day, so who knows? But we trust that the government will honour the commitments that they've made.
Do you want to come back, Richard? Do you want to get an answer? Who wants to go next?
I've got 8.
How many?
How many? Do you want to start then?
I think Councillor Evans has got a hand up.
Give him a chance to say.
They may well be the same questions as you've got, Councillor Evans, so let's have a look.
I doubt it. Yeah, I'm pleased to hear Councillor Eadie say that we're not going to be Lichfield centric, because a lot of people in the district, not just in Burntwood, but the greater district, do feel that that has happened in the past. So I'm really pleased to see that you are considering the whole of the district, and obviously for us here in Burntwood, that is really important to us. And I'm also pleased to see about the transport, because there are areas in Burntwood for business is that they find it difficult to actually access a lot of the places that are on the industrial estates, etc. So if that can be looked at across the district again, I think that's important. But I'm with bated breath to see that we're going to get what we've been promised, because, as I said earlier, we've been promised for years and nothing's happened. So I'm pleased that you've used that you are not Lichfield centric anymore. I remember that.
Yeah, we've all heard that now. Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Chair. Some of these are quite brief. First one around the incubator space. it's just how are we going to deliver that in Burntwood? I think the project we've got down here is good. I think it's something we support. I think I mentioned that at the last ONS meeting. But given we don't own well, we only own one premises, and I don't think we're going to be opening up a depot for an incubator space. What's the plan on delivering that outside of Lichfield and in that second urban centre? Do you want me to go through it at a time again?
Yeah, good.
Second one on the localities work. Again, I think potentially having some cash aside and kind of having it directed towards particular localities is something that I think is potentially very positive. I've just got a couple of questions on. It's currently budgeted at £5,000 per project. What would we do if a particular project comes in at 3,800? What are we going to do with the overspend? Please tell me we can keep it and do an additional project and it's not going back to Westminster. How will those projects be identified? How are we going to involve members and communities? Then it's 45 projects across 22 wards and 47 members, which is not easy maths on any front. And then the final point on localities work, we've got 45k due to be spent this financial year. That's optimistic. And should we not get that 45k out the door this year, again, is that going to be clawed back into Westminster, or is that something where we're just going to be able to roll it over into subsequent years? And then I've got to be careful on how I word the next one, because it could be potentially be very unfortunate. But the project around us girls, I agree with you completely, Councillor Reedy. I think it's something really valuable that this council can be putting some support behind. I think we're going to look at the success of the Lionesses this summer to realise actually how valuable that type of work is. And I'd like to just put on record absolutely my support for that.
Thank you. Thank you. You're quite right, I think, Dave, to pick up on the underlying issue that with regards to incubator space outside of Lichfield. The council doesn't currently have ownership of spaces that would naturally make that a quick win. Obviously, as far as the funding is concerned, the way that we've been directed, obviously, to schedule it, the incubator space in terms of the money, it's not all in once. It's towards, if anything, the back end of the 3 years. So to a certain extent, let's go with the assumption that we are successful. We are given the green light to carry out this plan. How will we deliver incubator space outside of Lichfield? We will obviously need to consider going and using that money to help buy property to allow us to deliver it, as much as obviously therefore, you know, having some of it if we need to again redevelop or reshape the property to make it fit for purpose. These are things we're going to have to explore once we've obviously given the green light. Equally as well, what has to be in there is working with not only obviously those existing properties that exist, but obviously again, if I'm thinking Burntwood, working obviously with the landowner who has been land banking rather than bringing anything forward. There has to be a joint conversation. And I know, to be fair to them, we do have, you know, not all the time, but we do have regular contact with them. And I'm sure there is, you know, there is a good communication channel there, and we're soon to do it. In terms of, obviously, you touched on the localities work in terms of two things. What I would say in terms of the project numbers, on your point of what happens if one doesn't, you know, hit the 5,000, the reality is this sort of is the milestones that we're trying to see that we can deliver. If we can deliver more, great. So to your point of saying if a project doesn't, you know, need the full allocation, would the money go into another one? Absolutely, that's what we would be looking at. I might leave to Jonathan the more tricky one about how we're going to identify the projects. I won't put words in his mouth, but it might turn around and say, well, we'll get there when we know what the funding is. In terms of, obviously, would we expect to see any money of the clawback? And everyone, no, we would. That's why government has basically said you've got to spend it in these years. You can't draw it down early. Equally as well, we want to make sure that we don't have to spend it back, that we do get it spent. In the sense of, are we being optimistic of trying to get money out the door in effectively year one, appreciating that could be that you get it in November and you've got to get it gone by March. You know, Jonathan's been quiet since he's not to distribute the COVID grants. I love to give him a challenge.
Just to go into your question regarding identifying the wards for the localities work, is utilising the social progress index data that the council have recently as a project brought in really, and rather than looking at the district overall in figures, it's more breaking it down to the 22 wards / parishes that we do really have, and looking at the 3 different core themes or information and that social progress index. So we've been looking internally as officers at that data and seeing where the, I won't put lower ranked, but the greatest needers, thank you, that's better word to do. Wards are, and seeing where that distribution is throughout the district, and then making sure that it is split more diversely across. So looking at the data at the moment, we've chosen Stowe, Chasetown and Armitage with Hansacre as a quite a varied split across really.
That's me.
Yeah. And spoken with ward members about initial ideas and showing them the data as well really, and helping them digest the data, see where it's come from and bring out initial projects, which a lot of the feedback received has been looking at community projects, community groups and local organisations and working alongside them really. So that's how it's been delivered at the moment, and then obviously once it progresses it'll be looking at other wards and seeing where things have worked well, things haven't worked well, and evolving that really. But that's how we've come to that methodology behind the wards we've chosen that's been identified really.
Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both Jonathan and Andy for those. And I think I agree with particularly the things around using the social progress indicators that we've got. I think that's a very positive way forward. If we just move on to Place Streets, can I just confirm on that, because when I initially read this, it read on the first look as if we were basically just going to do this as a one-off, which seemed to me to be a total waste of £60,000 because it's going to have no long-term impact. Can I just confirm that this is something where we're looking for the capital cost to be supported through this, and it's going to turn into something which is going to be something that we can offer to our district in the long term? You're nodding, so I'll take that as a as a yes on that one.
Yeah, that's absolutely what I want us to seek to deliver. If I think of other sort of community-based activities that the council's enabled, having purchased the equipment, the obvious thing is the pride that we're seeing communities take within the district in terms of doing the litter picking. So what did LDC do? LDC made sure it had the litter pickers, it had the equipment to be able to lend out to people, and therefore we went round afterwards when they had put the effort into their own communities and obviously took the waste away. For me, obviously, in terms of looking at Play Streets, it's about making sure that we have the equipment, we have the structure in place to build on an ongoing basis to allow people to bring their own community together to do, hopefully, fun activities that help people lead more active lives. That should not be a one-off, that should be an ongoing ambition for the council.
Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Once again, I'm absolutely delighted that Councillor Eady has referred to discussions with landowners, because mainly in the Chasetown ward, there has been land banking for years and years and years, which has really held back a lot of the development within Burntwood. I've mentioned it on so many occasions that we haven't been able to do the things we want because of that land banking, and that's really an important issue in Burntwood to get that sorted and up and running.
Anybody else want to come before I go back to Councillor Robertson? Any more, Councillor Robertson?
Thank you, Chair. Page 86, marketing in the district. I know that you've highlighted there that we're going to be marketing, attracting hotel and business triangulation providers and office space development. I think there's the opportunity there to widen that and to talk about light manufacturing. I know we spoke about it at the last overview scrutiny meeting. I think that's something that could be very positive given the obvious strengths of our district in that particular sector. On transport assistance, page 87. Completely understand why it's going with Business Park and Bradley Park. They're obviously very, very large employment areas within the district. What about the stay down in Paisley? Because there's a significant amount of employment there. And that would also serve the needs for our residents who live south and east of Lichfield, as opposed to just those north and west. I think that would be a very strong move that we can make. On workforce developments, kind of split across 87 and 88. Just in the outcome there, in terms of people being upskilled, I think that's very positive. But again, going back to the conversations we had at Glasgow and Scrutiny Committee meeting, I'd like to see upskilled and leading to improved employment prospects, improved wages, improved economic activity for that individual. And then my last one, if I can, and this may well be one that's potentially easy to pick up via email, but on some of those projects that didn't get followed through, I assume many of them on affordability grounds, but a lot of those did seem to be the type of things where we could be upskilling our workforce and attracting higher paid, better paid jobs and higher wages into the district. So I'd appreciate that, and more than happy to set that via email, just a little bit of information about how those decisions were made, not to explore some of those particularly.
Thank you. Anybody else? Anything on this? The one comment I had, Councillor, around the incubator space, that possibly working with partners like the County Council, identifying space. I think there may well be some space in Tracewater that's been used previously for business users, incubator space. So it might well be something we can talk to the County Council about potentially, bringing more into there.
Yes, absolutely, Chairman. I think that would be something we'd be delighted to do. You know, there's been, as you know, conversations around one public estate for a long time. As much as obviously we're talking to as I understand it, the County Council about coming in here, if they have any buildings and we can use them as well, that would be great. Just to come back to some of the points that they've made there. Yes, certainly, obviously, in terms of the transport, if we can look at that, yes. I mean, obviously, we've tried to pick out the larger areas, obviously, in terms of workforce. You know, the proof in the pudding is going to be how much it costs to put these routes on. Again, if there's money left in the pot, we can look at others. But I think obviously you're pointing upskilling and again the inward investment in terms of what we're trying to attract. Again, you know, it's about we put some headlines, but the reality is about attracting any form of employment into the district that gives people good career opportunities. And in terms of some of the other projects, what was the criteria that we looked at in terms of, you know, choosing one over the other? It was to a certain extent, and I'm not going to say it was that in all cases, it was where did we perceive we could potentially get better value for money. Some of them, in terms of the projects that we did discounted, look to be, in terms of the outcomes that you might expect, a very high cost to get to the outcome, and it was therefore, dare I suggest, who was benefiting the most. But we're certainly happy to go through any of them separately.
Anybody else? We're all happy with that. Thanks for the presentation, both of you, and we look forward to any updates. And obviously notification of when the money starts to arrive and that can be utilised. But thank you both very much for your time in doing that. Thank you, members. So we'll move on now to the next item, which is the delivery of the disabled facilities grants. Councillor Lax and the Tree PJ are doing this for us. Thank you. Are they still? Oh, they might. Just that members are aware, this is no longer confidential, this item. If you just wonder why we haven't gone into private session, doesn't need to be. We are going in private session after this for one further item, but not this item. Councillor.
I can't resist saying this. I will be less than 10 minutes. In fact, I will be less than 5. This is a briefing paper. It is just about overtaken by the full cabinet paper was published yesterday evening. The reason being is that getting to bottom out all the legal issues in what we want to do. This is back before you as a briefing paper. The big news, if you like, is that we're no longer going to do a shared service with Tamworth. That's their decision. We tried all sorts of options, but we couldn't get alignment with them. It wasn't for want of trying, but actually, when you read through this briefing paper, given that their amount of money is half of ours, and I think our approach, very much driven by the feedback I've had since I've been the portfolio holder from ONS committees and cabinet, is that our approach is probably a more holistic one. If you go on Tamworth's site, it's just click on this button, and the feedback is that obviously a lot of people relying on these grants need support. They're vulnerable for whatever reason, given they're wanting adaptations to their homes in circumstances where people are really struggling. So that's why. So I think this actually opened up a big opportunity for us as the district council to serve our residents. And also I'd make the point, given all the financial stuff you've been listening to, the money we are using for this is ring fenced. The cabinet paper sets out in far more detail the financials. I'm very grateful to Anthony, who's done an awful lot of background work on that. Lucy Robinson, who since this was delegated to myself and an officer, has driven the project forward to make sure that come April, when the current partnership with all the other Staffordshire councils finishes, that we are ready to transfer and operate our own system. And Simon, our chief exec, has done an awful lot of work as well in the background. So you can see from the briefing paper, the highlights are, we're going to do our own thing. The money is all ring fenced. I think the positives are that Lucy secured the computer system for our exclusive use at Lichfield. When Tamworth were dragging their feet, she still went ahead and said to make sure we are on time and scheduled for the transfer over in April. Cherry White, for those of you familiar who are our outside consultants, have been with us all through this and will stay on board as we transition with their expertise and support. When you're aware there's so many moving parts, when you want work done on adaptations, we are going to go in with the Independence Community Interest Company brackets, Plymouth close brackets, dynamic purchasing system. What's this all about? If you go on their website, any contractor locally, and this is again where we can take a big advantage, we say to them, please apply to be, for want of a better word, cleared by this community interest company. There's no fee to them, but they will do the due diligence in terms of providing warranties for the work they do, their insurance, etc., etc. And once you're on that, it's that homework is done for us, if you like. So then we hope we'll grow our pool of local contractors, and within that we'll be able to use our LATCO, our local authority trading company, with some existing skills in it, because again we have so many moving parts. If it's a simple adaptation, we've got a surveyor in the company who can do that. So it's making sure we've got a dynamic team that can respond more speedily than we've experienced with Millbrook to the applications and needs of our residents, and that's what we're looking for. It will still run like an in-house service, but it gives us, as you can see from the briefing paper, I think so many more positives to take this approach. And also we'll be applying our own housing assistance policy, and you may recall that while we were looking at how we give, we service the requirement for mandatory grants, we're looking to have discretionary ones as well, so we can make those decisions. So I'll leave it there. Please ask me any questions. If, having heard this evening and read the briefing paper, and you go through the cabinet paper, please get in touch with either myself or Simon or Lucy Robinson if you've got any further questions, so we can flush those out at cabinet next week.
Thank you for that, Councillor Axe. Who wants to start then? I thought so. Councillor Evans.
Councillor Lax won't be surprised either, I don't think. Yeah, well, we've had issues for a long time with this, and we've got to get it right, because we owe it to the people that need these grants to get them as speedily as possible. And reading the briefing paper, I'm glad that you refer to things like seamless customer journey, because those are vitally important. And what we have to recognise is that people who need these disabled facilities grants can't always understand exactly the way forward for them. So we need to be on board with that. I know that Councillor Lax, as have other people in the past, because it's been going on for years and years, but we haven't got the right people, although we were promised from Millbrook a very robust service, and it was all going to be wonderful when we had the presentation, but it hasn't turned out to be that way. So it is, I think, really important, having read this briefing paper, that we need to ensure that the backlog of cases is dealt with, but equally so, when you've got a backlog, you've got other people waiting in the wings to have access as well. I don't know how many cases there are, but I know that we were being told 200 residents were being supported by the current provider, but I know in my ward that there are people that have been seen by the OT, have needs, have had them assessed, but as yet they've not delivered. And I realise that this applies to people who are disabled, younger people as well. But I've said in the past that we have failed a lot of people who, in the meantime, whilst they've been waiting, have actually passed away. And people need to, it's difficult for people who aren't sitting around a council chamber to understand that when they apply for something, that there is a waiting time. And it's vitally important that people do understand that, but by the same token, it's equally important that things are moved along as quickly as possible, because needs arise, and I am sure that people I speak to think that because they've contacted councillor, it's going to happen within weeks, and it doesn't work like that. You try and tell people that, but particularly families who are pushing for it on behalf of their relatives. So I hope that we actually do get this system far more effective than it's been in the past. But when we are doing it on our own, I think we've got a greater chance of being successful than having to rely on other groups as we've had to do. So I just hope that. But I'm sure Councillor Latz is fed up with me going on and on and on numerous occasions about it. But I do think this is a very important issue that needs to be addressed, and that people need to be served properly.
Thank you. Did you want to come back, Councillor Latz?
Well, just to say, as Councillor Evans knows, we were locked into a contract with Silas on this. It wasn't necessarily of our choosing. We all know its history, that Millbrook, the current providers, made the pitch, got the job, and then it wasn't working out. And steps were taken by all the partners to say, this can't go on. And everybody's, if you like, for want of it, on their separate ways. But you'll see from the paper, for example, that we're going via Stafford Borough Council to share the OT provision. So where we can do things that will be far more effective, we are doing so. And we've made it clear in this briefing paper. And it says our ambition for the new service is to improve the overall service for our residents. Of course it is. That's what we want. We've all been fed up with the contract we were locked into, and improve performance in terms of level of spend. That's the reference I made to our holistic approach in Lichfield. Customer satisfaction. We want to provide a service to those customers who we know are vulnerable and need the support through the journey, because it's not always straightforward. And the time taken from grant application to completion, again, that will be under our control insofar as we can process it. We're still going to be reliant on a lot of working parts. As you all know, you've got to have your assessment. It's got to go, that's got to be checked through. You're going to need a surveyor. Then you've got to have contractors who are prepared to do the work. But I think, again, we're putting into this a lot of, I think, far better working parts than we had previously. where we've got the control and can monitor. We're stuck with dealing with a backlog. That was inevitable, but we're very aware of that. And it's going to be a hard first 12 months, but we think we've got the structure in place to see improvements.
I think the biggest frustration for us, and this is borne out in many ONS meetings, was the fact that when we approached Millbrook and asked for things to improve, they always came back and said, yes, things are improving. We are going to increase the number of adaptations that we do. And this went on and nothing materialised. And it really was frustrating for us. So we never pointed the finger at anyone here. It was always about the delivery of Millbrook to do it. The couple of questions that I have for you is, we know there's a backlog of circa 200. What initially are you going to do to sort of clear that backlog? First question. Secondly, will we see regular data to see how we are performing as an organisation in delivering this going forward? And then thirdly, those regular updates don't necessarily have to come to this meeting, but even through a briefing paper, so that we feel more confident when we're speaking to our residents that actually things have improved and that delivery of these adaptations is going to happen. And then also what pressure we will put on the people who are providing the adaptations to make sure, as we now own it, the book's going to start with us. So if residents complain, it's going to be down to us to explain why it hasn't happened. So those are all sort of things. Primarily the backlog, how are we going to address the backlog of 200? And then will we get regular data to see, and is there a target on how many of the adaptations you wish to see happen? So I'm throwing all that at you now, and then I'll bring in any members that got us a comment.
Data, we have to, it's a statutory responsibility to do all the reporting, so this is constantly monitored. And as we've said in the report, the first review will be 6 months, and then it will be 12 months, it'll be annually, but the data we have to complete anyway for central government is a requirement because we're spending their money on this. In terms of the backlog, I'll be perfectly honest, it is what it is. We know we've got to take it on. We don't even yet know, as you can see from the briefing paper, which staff will be tupied across to us, which is a legal requirement. So there are still at this stage, how many months out? 6 months out, still some unknowns. But I think the main thing is that we know we've got some good people who are our employees. We've got some better working parts already in place. Can't remember what it's called, the group that meets monthly to drive this forward is really on the ball. I have oversight of that as a cabinet member, and we are retaining Cherry White, who you all know have been a great help to us in supporting Lichfield when we were having great difficulties with the Silas partnership. So everything's in place, but we are going to have to accept the workload is going to be big, and we're going to have to triage it. That's the only way to work our way through it.
Okay. Members, anybody want to comment on this? Or the scheme? No? It's obviously it's a scheme that we welcome, and we can't be any worse than we have been in the past, so we can only get better. I'm just concerned that maybe 6 months is too long a wait to begin with, and then 12 months, whether we need to have information given to us more speedily than that in the first 12 months, maybe quarterly, so that we can see actually whether we are actually doing anything and delivering some of that and removing some of the backlog.
I can't see a problem, but in 3 months it's going to be, we've taken this on, this is the backlog, this is what we've assessed, and we're beginning. It's going to be a challenge because it's going to change on that date. We're contractually bound till March, and then it will be a new system. So by all means, but I'm not pretending it will be roses in the garden at that point, but more than happy to let you know what we found and how we're doing.
Councillor Eastland.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm very pleased that you're very confident about this new system going forward. We have in the past had our own staff doing this job. That's the reason this council went out to outside professional people, as we call them, to do this job for us. I do hope we've got the staff in place. I'm looking at the chief executive now. I hope that we've got the staff in place to take on. This is a big responsibility. It means a lot of homework, a lot of visiting, and a lot of trying to keep people calm while these claims are coming in forward. So I do hope and I pray that we've got enough people on our books in the district to take on this vast amount of job, and I wish you all the luck.
Thank you, Chair. So the arrangement that we're moving towards, putting the resource into our own wholly owned company. So that's already set up and ready. And as Councillor Lack said, some of the resource, some of the additional capacity that we expect to be able to tap into is already there. There is a process we have to go through with Millbrook to receive some of the staff that currently work for them, because the contract with them is coming to an end. We are legally obliged to take on some of those staff. One of the key reasons that we sought to put this activity into the wholly owned company is because we believe we'll have far more freedom and flexibility to attract and performance manage the right staff with the right quality staff going forward. And the last point I'd make is that, as again, I think Councillor Lack said, we don't know yet who we're going to get in terms of staff coming out of the Millbrook contract and into ours, but we are being as proactive as we possibly can, I assure you, Councillor, to make sure we can hit the floor running on the 1st of April next year.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim.
Councillor Cross.
Thank you. So the staff that's going to be TUPE'd over, I know you don't know how many, are they going to receive additional training to bring them more up to speed with your kind of way of working and not fall into the previous habits?
Well, they're going to have to do it our way, or not at all. We expect our staff to perform in the right way to deliver a service for our residents, and until we know which staff we get, even which particular area of expertise they're able to offer us, because of all the moving parts, we don't even know that at this point. So I'm sorry to say I can't say anything more than they'll join us and we'll see how they get on.
Lovely, thank you. Anybody else? No? So, well, thank you for the presentation, both, and we look forward to early information about how the new system is working. We're now moving into, that comes to the end of the public meeting, we're now moving into private session, exclusion of the public and press. Resolved that as publicity would be prejudicial to the public interest by reason of the confidential nature of the business to be transacted, the public and press be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business, which would involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1, schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972. I know we just get all that in by the time the last person has left. Marvellous, marvellous. Thank you all. Are we all okay to continue? We've got one,
not
we've
yet.
got one item in.
No. We need to stop the live stream first.
Sorry, I thought you'd done all that by now.